am Surgeon General. The Writhing Jar unique flask was introduced to Path of Exile in patch 2.2, almost a decade ago in the spring of 2016. Upon flask use, 2 writhing worms escape from the jar. These worms are normal enemies, have only a few hundred life, and are destroyed on hit. The flask's purpose is to give the player a way to spawn minor enemies to enable the reliable triggering of on-kill effects. In the league following its release, YouTuber Eirik Heiken created the first build which revolved entirely around abusing the Writhing Jar. Dubbed WORMBLASTER the Mth, the build used 4 writhing jars to spawn low-level worms in packs of enemies and detonated them with Abyssal Cry. It was an instant hit. The community fell in love with the clever use of mechanics, leading some players to pledge their devotion to the worms and admit to some of their darker secrets. In the time since, WORMBLASTER builds have cemented their place in PoE history. There has been a series of iterations on the original WORMBLASTER, with many related nerfs due to the build archetype's ability to scale stacking mechanics to obscene levels. Reportedly, this has led to a friendly feud between Rory Rackham, former GGG designer and creator of the Writhing Jar, and Mark Roberts, lead game designer, due to the difficulty of balancing around that damn worm flask. At some point, many Path of Exile build creators hear the call of the worm. My time has come. This is my bid to join the players immortalized in the WORMBLASTER pantheon. In this video, I will present a new Writhing Jar build, WORMBLASTER the Mth, Mana Worms. I serve only one master, and his name is Shai Baloo. Like all WORMBLASTERs, this build relies on stacking on-death effects. The main source of damage is Herald of Ice explosions, which can be procced at will by killing the worms from the Writhing Jar. This concept itself is straightforward, but there are several limitations with Herald of Ice that need to be overcome. First, Herald of Ice only deals its area of effect explosion damage when it shatters an enemy. By default, shatters only occur when killing a frozen enemy with hits. This would require the build to either build high chance to freeze or have very high crit chance with a meaningful amount of cold damage. We can get around this requirement by using the unique ring Call of the Void, which provides 2 essential effects. First, it makes it so that we can also shatter enemies if they're chilled instead of only if they're frozen. Second, it allows all our hit damage to inflict chill. This means we're no longer locked into dealing only cold damage. The other issue with Herald of Ice is its low base damage, under 400 average damage even at max level. This is further complicated by the fact that while Herald of Ice is a spell, it deals secondary damage and has the line, "Damage is not affected by modifiers to spell damage." Without some clever ways of scaling, it wouldn't be viable in the endgame. We will overcome this in 3 ways. First, we'll be popping as many Herald of Ice explosions as possible using our Writhing Jar worms. By scaling the area of effect of the Herald explosions, we can make those explosions overlap on enemies, which acts as a multiplier to overall damage. Herald of Ice gains additional base radius with its gem quality. Using a 23 quality gem plus an Ashes of the Stars amulet with at least a 27% roll on the quality line, we increase the base radius to 1.7 meters. We then scale this up with generic area of effect modifiers from the passive tree, maximum rolls of 14% area of effect on each of our graphs, plus the Flame Golems buff with some increased effect. After all these modifiers, the AoE of our Herald of Ice explosions is 2.7 meters, more than enough to ensure overlap of the explosions from our worms on single targets. The second way we'll scale Herald of Ice's damage is using critical strikes. By default, Heralds have no base critical strike chance, but we can add base crit chance using the increased critical strike support gem, applying Assassin's Mark, dropping Brittle Ground with increased ailment effect under the enemies, and stacking the Cluster Jewel notable Self-Fulfilling Prophecy, which grants Herald skills an additional 1% base crit chance each. This brings the base crit for Herald of Ice just over 8%. This is then scaled up with generic critical strike modifiers such as Power Charges and the Assassin Ascendancy. With a critical strike multiplier over 450% and near capped crit chance, we've added another multiplier to our Herald's damage. The final scaling method for Herald of Ice is our strongest and what makes this a Mana WORMBLASTER. It is normally very difficult to add flat base damage to Herald of Ice because it is unaffected by modifiers to spell damage. The typical sources of flat damage such as auras, battle mage, and equipment modifiers almost all specify that they add damage to spells. These will not apply to Herald of Ice. At the end of the day, this is a mana stacking build. Manastorm is a unique Lacewood Spirit Shield. Its unique effect is that upon casting a spell, the player will sacrifice all their mana to gain added maximum lightning damage equal to half of that mana for 4 seconds. Notably, this does not specify that the added damage is for spells or attacks. It's generic. This means that it will apply to Herald of Ice. With over 4,000 maximum mana, this adds an average of 1,500 flat lightning damage to our Herald once we factor in lucky damage from Foulborn Lori's Lantern. This multiplies the base damage of Herald of Ice by a factor of nearly 5, and scales with all of our previous multipliers as well. Manastorm can be incredibly powerful. It can add an obscene amount of base damage for almost any build. However, almost all builds have issues maintaining the huge amounts of mana that are needed to be sacrificed every 4 seconds. That is not an issue for our Wormblaster. Since we're building around killing worms from the Writhing Jar, we can use mana gained on kill to sustain our mana costs. If we use 5 Writhing Jars, each jar will spawn 2 worms, giving us 10 worms per flask use. Therefore, if we build in at least 10% mana gained on kill, we'll be able to guarantee completely refilling our mana when we kill a set of worms from our jars. We reach this threshold by stealing the Trickster's Polymath Ascendancy, which gives us 1% mana recovery on kill for each mastery we have allocated. On this build, I take 7 different masteries for 7% recovery on kill, plus the Thrill Killer Notable, which gives another 2%. We get the final small amount of mana on kill needed from Manastorm itself, which can give up to 100 flat mana on kill. So, by killing worms from the Writhing Jar, we'll both be delivering our damage via Herald of Ice explosions, as well as guaranteeing uptime on the buff from Manastorm. All we need to do is make sure that we have enough flask charge generation to support constant use of the Writhing Jar flasks. This can be done relatively easily by allocating the Replenishing Remedies passive cluster. Since Writhing Jars are hybrid flasks, they gain the charges from both the life and mana flask lines in this wheel. Using this wheel, plus the Rizlatha Pantheon, gives us passive charge gain every 3 seconds. This passive charge gain is then scaled up by increased flask charges gained modifiers that we take on the skill tree and in cluster jewels. At the end of the day, our Writhing Jars gain over 18 charges every 3 seconds. This is more than enough charge generation to always have worms available to proc our Herald of Ice explosions and refill our mana after getting the Manastorm buff. While we figured out a way to scale worm explosions to damage levels suitable for endgame content, it requires a lot of overlapping mechanics. We have to pop all of our worm flasks, we have to cast a spell to proc the Manastorm buff, and then we have to use a skill to actually kill those worms in order to start the chain of explosions. If we had to press a button to do each of these, the build would be far too clunky to play. In this section, I will show how this whole process can be integrated into a single button press using a clever combination of unique items, support gems, and a carefully chosen active skill gem. To automate popping all 5 of our flasks, we can use the unique belt Mother's Embrace. This belt grants the effect minions use your flasks when summoned. With Mother's Embrace and 5 Writhing Jars on our character, anytime we summon a minion, all 5 of our flasks will be used once, summoning 10 worms. If we summon more than 1 minion at a time, each minion will use every flask, multiplying our total worms spawned by the number of minions that we summon until we run out of Writhing Jar flask charges. The question now is, what's the most convenient minion to use? Living Lightning support is a new support gem released this patch. It causes supported skills to summon a Living Lightning minion when the supported skill deals lightning hit damage. We can link this to any spell of our choosing to do 2 things. First, since we're using a spell, it will proc the sacrifice effect on Manastorm, giving us added flat lightning damage. That spell will therefore summon Living Lightning since it's dealing lightning damage. And, since the Living Lightnings are minions, they will use all of our Writhing Jars. This has now automated the process of using the jars and proccing the Manastorm effect. Additionally, if we choose a spell skill that deals multiple hits with a delay in between them, we could use the same cast to both spawn our worms as well as kill them. Preferably, the skill would also have a large area of effect so that we are guaranteed to hit the worms even with some spread in where they are spawned. Void Sphere of Rending ends up being the perfect choice. It's an area of effect ability so it can hit multiple enemies in a pack, which will spawn the maximum amount of Living Lightnings and therefore all of our worms. Additionally, it pulses every quarter second. After spawning worms on the first hit, the next pulse will kill the worms, causing our Herald of Ice explosions. This all happens on a single button press, and very quickly. To demonstrate, I'll step through some footage frame by frame. On this frame, I cast Void Sphere of Rending. This dumps all of our mana into the Manastorm effect, giving us added lightning damage. Several frames later, at the end of the casting animation, the Void Sphere hits enemies. Since we've dealt lightning damage, this spawns one living lightning for every enemy hit. Because of the effect of our unique belt, this also uses all of our flask charges on the same frame, spawning a bunch of writhing worms. The worms pop out at the location of the enemies. Several frames later, the Void Sphere pulses for the first time. This kills the writhing worms. On death, each of those writhing worms generates a Herald of Ice explosion. Those explosions overlap the actual enemies that we're targeting, killing them. Those enemies will also cause Herald of Ice explosions, and the effect can chain to other packs in dense enough content. Because of the chain explosions, this build is fantastic for mapping content. It does very well in the reworked breaches from this league's new mechanic. It's also good for opening strongboxes. You can precast the Void Sphere before you open the strongbox, and the whole process will automatically happen when the Void Sphere pulses after enemies are spawned. The build's single target damage is a little lacking and is capped by how quickly we can recharge our Writhing Worm flasks. With fully charged flasks, it deals about 10 million damage on single targets, assuming all overlaps. However, it can only sustain 20 worms every 3 seconds, giving us about 1.5 million DPS in long fights. However, the front-loaded damage is more than enough to take down T16 map bosses in just a few seconds. I've chosen to package this interaction into an assassin build. I estimate the cost to put it together at around 10 divines. A path of building link is provided in the video description below. The reworked assassin was chosen because its critical strike synergies seriously help scale the low base crit chance on Herald of Ice. Additionally, playing a shadow build gives access to the Polymath mana recovery on kill, as explained previously. Since we need to keep all of our mana unreserved for Manastorm, we'll be reserving against our life to activate Herald of Ice. This has excellent synergy with the new Lycia bloodline, which grants Herald skills 1% more damage per 1% life that they reserve. Initially, I attempted to build around reserving 99% of my life and scaling only Energy Shield, using Chevron's wrappings to prevent chaos damage bypass. This would have given a larger, more multiplier from the bloodline ascendancy, but ultimately it was too difficult to get sufficient flat Energy Shield to have a reasonable hit pool. In the end, I settled on using Foulborn Coming Calamity. This saves us a jewel socket by granting Lone Messenger without needing to use a cluster jewel. Lone Messenger is mandatory for the build. It essentially doubles the damage of our Herald of Ice explosions. Additionally, this forces our Herald reservation to be 45%, no matter what multipliers we have on it from support gems. This causes us to have a hybrid hit pool of life, energy shield, and mana after taking mind over matter. This approach has excellent synergy with Polymath, which gives recovery of all 3 of these resources in one package. Now, all that being said, I do think it would be possible to play this on other ascendancies. Hierophant is an obvious choice to consider. He would get generic % damage and area of effect from scaling mana, all 3 of which are needed for this build. You would need to find another solution for on-kill recovery of mana without access to Polymath. One possibility would be to use the last rights wheel on the skill tree and the associated curse mastery. These are conveniently located near the Templar start, and given a source of curse on hit, are equivalent to 4% mana on kill. With Thrill Killer and Mind Drinker on the passive tree, you're up to 8%, and the last little bit of mana recovery could be achieved with the flat mana on kill from Manastorm. The biggest weakness of the assassin version of the build is its defense. It has a low total hit pool and not a lot of easy ways to scale defenses with all the mechanics that we're already forced to use. Hierophant may be superior in that aspect, as the Ascendancy's mana as extra maximum energy shield would help add a source of flat ES that Assassin lacks. If you have any clever ideas of other mechanics that you could work into the build or ways to play on other classes, I'd be interested to see your suggestions in the comments. I hope that this video has given you some ideas of tech that you can work into your own builds. If you enjoyed the video or are interested in more content of this type, or in-depth build guides with an emphasis on mechanics, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.